Draws. Thus far, you've been introduced to two potential endings of the game. One is checkmate, and the other is resignation. Yet there's another, drawn games. There are many possible ways in which a game may be drawn. One is by mutual consent. This can happen at any time during the game, and really for any reason. But typically, it's when the two players decide that they are legitimately tied. Threefold repetition is when the same position occurs 3 times. You'll see this in a situation called perpetual check, but it can happen at any time and with any chessman. Exhaustion of material happens when there is a lack of chessmen remaining such that checkmate is not possible. Stalemate is when the king is not in check, but yet he cannot move. And the 50-move rule is a rather obscure one, where 50 moves have been made, there's been no mate, no capture, and no pawns have been moved. This is very rare and likely will never apply to your game. Here are some examples of draw by exhaustion of material. As we've learned before, it is illegal to put your own king in check, and if you've only got 2 kings left in a game, there is no possible way for either of you to win. This is an automatic draw. Also, if you've got a single bishop or a single knight on the board, this is also an impossible situation. In other words, you cannot put the other king in checkmate. It is not possible. And so it is a draw. Here, however, the bishop ahead wins for white. Why? Because bishop can be used to win black's pawns and to aid white's pawns to queen. Games where both sides have their king and queen as their last remaining pieces tend to end in a draw. While the queen is the most powerful piece, unless someone makes a massive blunder, statistically this is a draw. Now let's discuss checkmate versus stalemate. We all know that checkmate is a situation where the king is in check and he cannot move. But stalemate is where the king is not in check and yet he cannot move. Let's do a little quiz, shall we? Is this checkmate or stalemate? Well, the king is in check, and so this is checkmate. And here, this king is not in check, and yet he cannot move, and so it is stalemate. Note how very similar these two situations are. You need to be very careful as you're in the last stages of a game, not to accidentally cause stalemate. To get to the end of a game and then to make a blunder like this is indeed quite frustrating. And another one, is this stalemate or checkmate? Well, the king is in check, and so it is checkmate. But notice this one. This one is stalemate. Note, the king is not in check, but he cannot move. All of his moves are either guarded by the opposing king or the pawn. Be very careful in your approach of the king to know the difference between the two. Here's a rather unusual one. You'll note that black's pawn is about to be queened. This would inevitably give him the advantage to win the game. However, it's white's turn, and he has no legal moves left. He cannot move at all. His pawns are completely blocked. His king is being hemmed in largely by his own pawns. His one remaining square that's not blocked would put him in check by black's pawn. Therefore, stalemate. Sorry, black. White has just made the daring move of putting her queen between black's rook and king. Obviously, black's rook or king could simply capture the queen, but now what will white do? It appears that she has no moves available. All of her pawns are blocked. Her king is hemmed in by the rook. And if she moves her knight, she puts herself in check, an illegal move. Thus, we have stalemate. Here we have a different type of draw. So let's watch as white's bishop takes black's pawn. Black answers with a recapture by the pawn. White responds by capturing black's pawn and putting him in check. And now begins a series of moves. Black moves out of check. White puts black in check. Black moves out of check. White puts black in check. You recall at the very beginning something called threefold repetition. This is an example of that. You could also call this draw by a perpetual check. Be careful not to get into these situations, particularly if it seems like you have the advantage.